moments away from its closest pass near our solar system. The world is waiting for the first clear image, the proof of what this thing really is. And then, suddenly, the feed goes dark. Not for a few minutes, not even a few hours, for days. When the signal finally returns, the moment is gone. And so is the data. NASA says nothing. The silence is deafening. What happened in those missing days? Was it a glitch, or did they see something they weren't ready to show the world? Stay with me, because tonight we're diving into the Psyche blackout, the moment that could change everything we thought we knew about 3i Atlas, and maybe even about our place in the universe. Something strange happened the night NASA went silent. The Psyche probe was out there, millions of miles from Earth, quietly drifting through the darkness between Mars and Jupiter. Its mission was simple, or at least it should have been. Capture the closest images of 3i Atlas, the interstellar object that had already defied every prediction scientists made. But as its cameras turned toward the target, something changed. The signal that had been steady for weeks suddenly cut to black. No warning, no glitch reports, just silence for hours, then days. When the feed finally came back online, the object had already moved past the window of observation. Whatever happened in that gap, NASA never explained. And for those watching the data stream in real time, it felt like the universe itself had blinked. Before we go deeper, take a second to tap subscribe and like this video. It helps us keep exploring these strange cosmic mysteries together. There's so much out there waiting to be uncovered, and your support helps keep the lights on while we search the dark corners of space. Now, here's where it gets truly unsettling. NASA's public logs didn't list any system failures during those missing days. No meteor storms, no solar flares, no hardware malfunctions that could justify a total communication blackout. Yet every public feed tied to the Psyche probe went dark at the same time. Telemetry, cameras, diagnostics, even the power monitoring data. The kind of silence that doesn't just happen by accident. A few engineers later admitted, off record, that they were told to pause external data transfers as part of an internal review. But no one ever clarified what that review was for, and no official explanation has been given since. The only certainty is this. The blackout happened right when Psyche should have been closest to 3i Atlas. The timing is too precise to ignore. The object itself, 3i Atlas, was already surrounded by mystery. Discovered only months before, it behaved nothing like a comet or asteroid. Its orbit bent sharply, as if pushed by something other than gravity. Its brightness pulsed in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, steady one moment, flickering the next, like a beacon sending signals across the void. By the time NASA turned Psyche's instruments toward it, curiosity had turned to quiet obsession. Researchers wanted answers. Was it a natural body or something more? Could it be debris from another system or something made? These were questions that could have changed how we see our place in the universe. But the moment we might have found out, the eyes we had in space suddenly went blind. Some analysts think the blackout was part of NASA's wider October 1st shutdown, when budget delays forced certain departments to go offline. But the timing doesn't line up. The Psyche mission isn't part of any division that was closed during the fiscal pause. Its communication lines were operated independently through the Deep Space Network, which remained active. That means this wasn't a bureaucratic shutdown. It was a deliberate blackout. Someone, somewhere, made a decision to cut the feed at the most critical moment of the mission. The question is why? In those missing 3 days, something might have appeared on Psyche's sensors that wasn't meant for the public to see. Maybe the object emitted radiation the instruments couldn't explain. Maybe the light curves revealed artificial symmetry, something that suggested structure. Or maybe Psyche saw something else entirely. Something that moved. Whatever the truth is, the data gap leaves room for only speculation. And speculation in space always grows faster than facts. Meanwhile, amateur astronomers were still tracking 3i Atlas from Earth. Some noticed that during the same time NASA's feed went dark, the object's brightness spiked sharply. It was like a brief flash, too strong to be reflected sunlight, but too short to be sustained combustion. A burst of energy from a rotating source, perhaps, or an ejection of gas. But when they compared it to the comet's path afterward, they found something even stranger. The trajectory had shifted slightly, as if the object had corrected itself. Small, but undeniable. In deep space, natural forces don't usually act that precisely. When the data came back online, NASA's updates were brief and vague. A single sentence confirmed, "Communication restored. No critical anomalies detected." But the images that were supposed to accompany the report never appeared. In their place, the agency released older photos, taken weeks before the blackout. Many researchers in the independent astronomy community quickly noticed the gap and called for the missing frames. They were told the data was under review. Months later, it still is. It's as if an entire section of Psyche's memory was quietly sealed off from public access. This isn't the first time NASA's gone silent around a sensitive event. During the Oumuamua incident years earlier, certain datasets vanished from public servers just before new findings were expected. It's a pattern, the kind of operational pause that fuels every conspiracy theorist's dream. But it's also a sign that what's happening out there might be bigger than they're ready to admit. When agencies that thrive on public trust choose silence over clarity, it usually means they're staring at something that challenges the limits of what we think we know. Back at Mission Control, the official story remains that Psyche experienced a temporary signal disruption. But deep inside NASA's archives, timestamp data shows the probe maintained full power and orientation throughout the gap. It didn't drift, didn't lose alignment. It just stopped transmitting. That's not how malfunctions behave. That's how a manual override works. Someone, or something, told Psyche to stop talking. As of now, no one outside the agency knows what the cameras captured during those lost days. But if there's one thing we've learned from the cosmos, it's that the truth doesn't stay hidden forever. Light travels, data leaks, and eventually, every secret written in the dark finds its way back to us. When the Psyche feed finally returned, the world expected answers. Instead, all we got was static, fragments of data that felt more like echoes than evidence. Scientists at the Jet Propulsion Lab sat in stunned silence as the transmission blinked back to life. Telemetry stable, but image feed frozen on a single grey frame. It was as if the probe had seen something it couldn't process. A frame so heavy with information that it simply stopped. In Mission Control, the monitors flickered with meaningless digits. But among those numbers, engineers noticed something odd. A cluster of repeating coordinates that didn't match the probe's path. Almost like Psyche had tried to tag a location in space before it went dark again. In the hours that followed, NASA quietly purged the public livestream archives. The raw telemetry that hobbyists around the world had been mirroring suddenly redirected to a locked gateway. People who'd been capturing the feed on their home servers woke up to error messages. Access denied. A few frames did leak through, and those few are what lit the fire. They showed faint outlines, like a haze against the stars, a soft curve illuminated by the probe's distant reflection. It didn't look like a comet tail or a dust plume. It looked deliberate, structured, manufactured, the kind of geometry nature doesn't usually draw. That's when the questions started. Why would NASA hide data from a public science mission? What could possibly be so sensitive about a passing rock? The agency's silence only made things worse. A few unofficial leaks claimed the engineers were instructed to pause all visual analysis until upper clearance was given. Another rumor suggested the frame showed an object near 3I Atlas that wasn't catalogued anywhere in NASA's databases. Maybe a companion object, or a probe following the probe. Within days, Reddit threads and astronomy forums exploded with speculation. Some said Psyche had captured an artificial satellite built by another civilization. Others argued it was just sensor noise. But then an independent researcher in Arizona published an analysis of the leaked coordinates. They pointed not to deep space, but back toward the Scutum Centaurus arm, a dense region of the Milky Way already famous for strange electromagnetic anomalies. And that's where the story turned from curiosity to concern. If Psyche had, in fact, recorded a signal from that region, it would mean 3i Atlas wasn't wandering freely. It was coming from somewhere, or being guided. The data spike that followed the blackout matched frequencies NASA has historically filtered from public releases, bands that overlap with both artificial radio interference and classified communications. Coincidence maybe, but after decades of listening to the stars, NASA knows how to separate static from signal. The decision to hide that signal can only mean one thing. It meant something. People began connecting dots that probably shouldn't have been connected, but they did it anyway. Some noticed that 2 other satellites, ESA's solar orbiter and a private CubeSat tracking cosmic rays, also went offline for brief windows during the same period. Different agencies, different missions, same silence. The odds of that happening naturally are microscopic. Something out there either jammed multiple instruments at once or made them all shut down on purpose. Neither answer feels comforting. Take a moment and hit subscribe if you're fascinated by this kind of deep space mystery. Every week we dive into real-world events NASA doesn't like to talk about, and your support helps keep these investigations alive. Now, let's go back to the moment Psyche's signal resumed, because that's where the story gets even stranger. When communication was restored, the probe's onboard clock was 6 minutes out of sync. That might sound small, but for spacecraft timing, it's massive. Internal logs showed no power loss, no radiation event, no gyroscope fault. It was as though Psyche had experienced time differently, slower, like something around it distorted its local field. Engineers corrected the clock, resynced the transmission, and moved on. But one systems analyst, in a note buried in the post-event report, wrote something chilling. Possible external influence, time drift inconsistent with software error. And there was the light. The brightness of 3i Atlas was no longer steady. It pulsed every 11 minutes, dim to bright, like a cosmic heartbeat. The intervals were so regular that even skeptics couldn't explain it as random outgassing. Nature doesn't keep time that perfectly. NASA called it rotational variance. Independent scientists called it a signal. Meanwhile, archived deep space images from before the blackout began to vanish from NASA's open servers. Entire directories disappeared overnight, replaced with placeholders reading data under calibration. The few researchers who had downloaded backups started noticing discrepancies. Pixel artifacts rearranged, timestamps misaligned, color profiles that didn't match the originals. Subtle edits, like someone was cleaning the digital fingerprints. If it was just a routine calibration, why the secrecy? Why replace untouched data with processed blanks? By now, insiders at the agency were whispering about internal tension. Some scientists wanted the information released, believing it was a breakthrough in understanding interstellar objects. Others demanded total silence, arguing that the data was potentially destabilizing. That phrase, potentially destabilizing, appeared in one leaked memo. It's the same language used in national security briefings, not space research. Whatever Psyche had seen, it was no longer just a scientific mystery. It had become a classified event. At the same time, independent astronomers tried to observe 3i Atlas directly, but by then it had already faded beyond optical range. It was gone. The one chance to see it up close had been lost in those missing days. And so, the blackout became the story itself. What NASA saw before the shutdown changes everything, not because of what they released, but because of what they didn't. Back on Earth, subtle shifts appeared in the official database of small body trajectories. 3i Atlas was still listed, but its orbital data had been revised without notice. Its new projected path no longer intersected with the inner solar system. It was as if NASA wanted the public to think it had left for good. But deep space tracking stations in Spain and Australia continued to pick up faint signals, bursts of radio noise moving just slightly off the original course. They weren't strong enough to confirm the object was still there, but strong enough to prove something was. In the silence that followed, a feeling settled over the scientific community. A quiet understanding that maybe not everything above us is meant to be catalogued or even explained. The stars have always held secrets, but sometimes the real mystery isn't what we discover. It's what we're told to forget. For weeks after the blackout, nothing new came from NASA. It was as if someone had drawn a curtain across the sky and told everyone to stop looking. But curiosity doesn't fade that easily. In astronomy, silence is never normal. Even when nothing's happening, data always flows. Thermal readings, cosmic background noise, light curves, telemetry pings. But in the case of 3i Atlas, everything went still. No updates, no mentions, not even the usual routine system maintenance post that NASA releases to calm public speculation. That's when people started digging. A few independent researchers began cross-checking satellite timing logs and discovered something hidden in plain sight. During the same days, the Psyche feed went dark. Several deep space observatories in Chile and Hawaii recorded unexplained electromagnetic fluctuations. The spikes weren't random. They followed a pattern. A slow rise, a sharp pulse, then silence, repeating roughly every 12 minutes. The strange part? The pulse interval was almost identical to the light flicker NASA had tried to explain as rotational variance. Two completely different instruments, thousands of miles apart, both picking up the same rhythm from the same region of space. Coincidence? Maybe. But science rarely leaves that much room for coincidence. One physicist from the University of Arizona, Dr. Miller, ran a spectrum analysis on the public data. He found harmonics that shouldn't exist in natural sources. In his own words, it looks like modulation. Someone's encoding information into the light. When he published his findings, his paper vanished from the archive within 48 hours. Not retracted, not corrected, deleted. Even cached copies were scrubbed. That kind of censorship only fueled more suspicion. If 3i Atlas was just another comet, why were scientists being silenced? Amateur astronomers tried to fill the gap. They aimed backyard telescopes at the coordinates Dr. Miller had posted, hoping to see something for themselves. What they found was eerie. Some reported seeing brief flashes, like faint Morse code across the stars. Others claimed their equipment froze when pointed at the location, as if electromagnetic interference was jamming consumer-grade sensors. A few even recorded distorted audio signals in their receivers, mechanical hums layered with rhythmic clicks. It didn't sound like space static. It sounded intentional. By this time, social media was alive with theories. Some said it was an alien probe sending test pings back to its origin. Others insisted it was a covert military experiment using deep space frequencies as a cover. But none of those explanations fit perfectly. The energy readings were too clean, too consistent. Natural events are messy. This was precise. Meanwhile, quiet chatter began surfacing from inside the European Space Agency. An anonymous employee leaked that ESA had been asked by NASA to pause cooperative tracking of 3i Atlas until further notice. In other words, stop watching. That instruction alone spoke volumes. Space agencies collaborate on nearly everything. When one tells another to step away, it means they've seen something sensitive enough to restrict to national channels. Around that time, a small-scale podcast hosted by two astrophotographers picked up traction. They called themselves the Sky Watchers. They released an episode titled "The Object That Silenced NASA," and within hours it went viral. They discussed an intercepted transmission reportedly from Psyche's low-gain antenna, picked up accidentally by a Canadian radio array. The signal lasted only 3 minutes, but contained bursts of repeating numerical patterns: 11, 7, 4, 11, 7, 4, looping again and again. It was meaningless to most, but numerologists immediately tied it to prime intervals used in quantum encryption sequences. Whether true or not, The story took off. You might think NASA would step in to clarify things, but they didn't. No denials, no confirmation, just silence. And silence, as history shows, is often the loudest response. Every day, more independent researchers tried to piece together fragments, cross-checking timestamps, analyzing open radio data, matching energy levels to known cosmic events. None of it lined up. The blackout had created a blind spot in the data chain, a hole that couldn't be filled by coincidence. Around this period, a whistleblower claiming to work at the Deep Space Network posted a short, cryptic message: "Telemetry still coming, it's not gone. But they won't label it 3i Atlas anymore." The post was removed within minutes. No username trace, no IP record, but the word stuck. If NASA was still receiving data under a different label, that meant the object was still active, still transmitting, only now hidden under another name or classification. People started looking for replacement IDs in NASA's small body database. A few noticed a new entry added quietly 2 weeks after the blackout. It listed a faint, slow-moving body tagged Object 2025 GQ3, positioned suspiciously close to the last known location of 3i Atlas. The data entry gave almost no details, no discovery credits, no orbital period, no official naming, just coordinates and a notation: long period body, understudy. For many, that was confirmation enough that the agency had simply renamed the object to bury the trail in bureaucracy. Now, imagine being one of the few scientists in those inner circles, seeing what the public can't, knowing you can't talk about it. The pressure, the paranoia, the quiet fear that one wrong word could cost your career. That's what makes these mysteries so heavy. Not just what's hidden in space, but what's hidden on Earth to keep it contained. And here's where the story deepens. Remember the repeating light pulse every 11 minutes? 2 months later, a new satellite launched by a private company recorded another pulse. But this time, it wasn't 11 minutes apart. It was 10. The interval had shortened. Whatever was causing the signal was accelerating. That kind of change doesn't happen naturally. It suggested movement, adaptation, or maybe even a reaction to being observed. Some researchers argued that the pulse was an artifact, a byproduct of the probe's damaged sensors. Others said it was intelligent, maybe even a message, but the pattern grew stronger with each observation. For a brief window, NASA's Deep Space Network captured one last spike. Then it vanished completely. Since then, no confirmed signal has been detected. It's like the object knew we were watching and decided to turn away. That's when the fear began to sink in. Not that we had found something out there, but that something out there had found us. And for the first time in modern astronomy, silence didn't mean safety. It meant someone was choosing not to speak. If you're still here and you love following mysteries that blur the line between science and the unknown, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and share it with others who love deep space storytelling. Your support helps us keep digging into these questions no one else dares to ask. As the public stared into the sky, hoping for another glimpse, one final report emerged from a retired NASA systems engineer. He claimed that, during the blackout window, the Psyche probe's magnetometer recorded a field inversion, the kind that would only occur if the probe passed through an artificial electromagnetic envelope. If true, that would mean 3i Atlas wasn't just a visitor. It was shielded, maybe hiding something, or protecting itself from us. When NASA finally broke its silence, the statement was short and sterile, like something written to calm investors, not answer questions. They claimed the Psyche probe had experienced temporary communication interruptions due to radiation interference. But those who work in deep space telemetry knew better. Radiation interference doesn't last for days, and it doesn't conveniently occur during the exact window an object like 3i Atlas passes within range. The timing was too neat, the explanation too simple. Still, it gave the media a headline, and for a moment the noise faded. But inside NASA, something else was happening. A quiet internal memo circulated among departments labeled Level 4, Need to Know. In it, engineers were instructed to stop referring to 3I Atlas by name in their reports. Instead, they were to use a new designation, Spectre 21. No explanation, no reasoning, just a shift in language. And in organizations that large, language always matters. It's how secrets get buried. Change the name, change the trail. Suddenly, the public would find nothing on 3I Atlas, because all the new data would live under an unrelated label. Meanwhile, at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a technician leaked that several frames from Psyche's deep space camera had been classified. These weren't blurry images. They were sharp, color-corrected composites showing an object that didn't match the shape of any known comet. The data showed symmetry, deliberate geometry. The heat readings suggested metallic composition, not ice or dust. In one frame, a faint glow could be seen trailing behind it, not from reflection, but from active emission, like energy bleeding from a source. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't a rock passing through by chance. The technician said he only saw the images for seconds before they were moved into a secure server, but he remembered the caption under the preview, Frame 421, Unclassified Anomaly. That label told him two things. First, NASA didn't yet know what it was. Second, someone high up had already decided the public wasn't ready to find out. Word spread through the agency faster than anyone expected. Engineers whispered during breaks. Analysts traded theories behind closed doors. Some thought 3I Atlas was a fragment from an ancient probe, maybe sent centuries ago by a civilization long gone. Others feared it might be an advanced surveillance craft mapping our solar system. Whatever it was, no one could deny that the object's behavior was intentional. It changed speed, it changed direction, and it did both without any visible propulsion. Out in the wider scientific community, skepticism mixed with fascination. Professors who had never cared about conspiracy theories suddenly found themselves running simulations to see if an object could enter our system at that velocity and still maintain structural integrity. The math didn't work. A natural body moving that fast should have disintegrated long before reaching Mars. So why hadn't it? The answer most scientists settled on privately was the same: internal control. It was steering. Around the same time, a small team of data analysts noticed something strange in NASA's Deep Space Network logs. Every time the probe tried to transmit data about 3I Atlas, the bandwidth allocation for civilian channels dropped by nearly half. It was as if someone was rerouting the feed elsewhere, somewhere not listed in the public documentation. The pattern repeated 3 times, 3 separate attempts, 3 sudden drops. Each time, the public feed showed static, but internal timestamps proved that data had been sent somewhere, to whom no one knew. As weeks passed, more pieces fell into place. Amateur observers in Australia picked up a faint light signature in the same coordinates where Psyche last tracked the object. It wasn't moving anymore. It was just there, steady, hovering at a constant brightness level far too uniform for a comet. One observer described it as a candle that refuses to flicker. He posted the footage online, but within hours, it vanished from every major platform under copyright claim. That claim came from an entity that didn't exist before, a placeholder organization registered under the name Solar Research Initiative. It had no address, no board members, no contact details, just a digital fingerprint that traced back to a government network in Virginia. And yet, people kept watching, because curiosity, once sparked, doesn't fade. Every week, small details leaked. New frequency bursts, new coordinates, strange reflections on telescopic sensors. Some began to suspect that the object wasn't moving away anymore, but slowly adjusting its path, back toward the inner solar system. The direction fit perfectly with Earth's orbital plane. NASA's silence became its own message. The agency stopped publishing Psyche's status updates altogether, saying only that the mission remains healthy, But those who followed every launch knew that when a space probe goes silent in its data sharing, it usually means one of two things. It's dead, or it's doing something classified. One late evening, a journalist from The Atlantic managed to reach a retired NASA administrator. On record, he said nothing. Off record, he said something chilling. There are times we see things we can't explain, and it's easier to stop looking than admit what we found. When asked what that meant, he hung up. If you're still watching, you know we dig deep into stories that live on the edge of discovery and denial. So take a second, hit subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who loves uncovering hidden truths. The more of you who join this journey, the more light we can shine on the mysteries no one else will talk about. Back in space, Psyche's transmission log showed one last anomaly before communication officially ended. At 03:27 UTC, the probe registered a power surge, a spike 3 times higher than its output limit, then reset itself. The line of code attached to that log contained a single unreadable string of symbols. No one has ever decrypted it. That was the moment everything stopped. The feed, the data, the mission. For months afterward, nothing. Until one night, an observatory in Japan recorded a sudden burst of light from the same region. It wasn't bright enough to classify as an explosion, but it was too concentrated to be random. The light flashed 3 times, paused, and flashed again. 3, 1, 3i. A signature. A reminder. Whatever 3i Atlas was, it hadn't disappeared. It had simply gone dark, waiting for the next time someone dared to look. In the weeks after the blackout, public attention drifted. News cycles moved on to other things. Politics, weather, celebrity scandals. But for the people who knew what they saw, what they read, and what they couldn't unsee, the silence felt heavier than before. It was as if the entire world had collectively agreed to look away from the one story that actually mattered. Deep in online communities where space enthusiasts and data trackers meet, a few began comparing notes. They noticed something curious. NASA's space weather updates were missing key readings from the same time Psyche's feed went dark. The solar wind data simply stopped. For anyone who watches those numbers daily, that kind of gap doesn't happen by accident. It's part of a larger pattern, a blackout not just in vision, but in information. Among those watching was Dr. Amelia Reyes, a retired astrophysicist who had worked on the Voyager communications system decades earlier. When she saw the gaps, she recognized the pattern immediately. It wasn't failure. It was removal. Someone had gone into the data pipeline and cut the stream at the source, then filled the missing hours with dummy numbers. She said the replacements looked too perfect, too clean. Space is never that neat. Nature doesn't draw straight lines in radiation charts. Only humans do. Around the same time, a small research group from the University of Arizona published a short paper claiming that a faint but detectable radio echo had been found near the point where Psyche last sent its data. They described it as a structured harmonic signal inconsistent with known natural phenomena. In simpler terms, it was repeating, predictable, and intelligent. Within 24 hours, the paper vanished from the journal's website. A note appeared saying, "Retracted pending verification." When contacted, the lead author refused to speak. The silence made people wonder. What could have been so sensitive that even discussing it publicly was off limits? What did Psyche see before the feed was cut? NASA maintained its stance that the mission was unaffected, that Psyche was still on course toward its target asteroid, doing fine. But every visual update they shared looked months old. The stars didn't align with the timestamps. The lighting was off, and the telemetry, the heartbeat of every probe, was absent. No scientist releases footage without telemetry. It's like showing a patient's X-ray without their pulse. To trained eyes, the lie was obvious. Meanwhile, new whispers began spreading. Amateur astronomers, especially those with private observatories, claimed to have seen strange reflections in the direction Psyche had been last tracking. 3i Atlas. One man from Chile reported seeing what he called a slow spiral of light fading in and out over several hours. He thought it was a sensor glitch, until 3 others saw the same thing from different continents. The lights didn't move like satellites or debris. They pulsed in rhythm, almost like a message. A few weeks later, footage appeared on Reddit, blurry but convincing. It showed what looked like a glowing curve arcing across the blackness of space. The curve had a definite shape, a smoothness that didn't belong to ice or rock. Within an hour, the post was flagged and removed. The user who uploaded it deleted their account, but not before one comment appeared under the video. "This isn't a comet, it's watching." That comment haunted people. What does it mean for something to be watching from the dark? Scientists who dared to talk about it were careful with their words. They said anomalous, unidentified, non-ballistic, never intelligent, never constructed. Because once you admit design, you admit intent, and intent means someone or something built it. When you step back and look at the timing, it starts to feel less random. The feed went dark right before Psyche's closest pass. The replacement data came from an untraceable internal server. The public explanation contradicted known technical limits, and every person who spoke about it directly either stopped responding or retracted their statements. If this were a movie, it would sound like a setup for the reveal. But this is real, and the only thing keeping it from becoming public truth is silence. Now here's something most people missed, and I want you to really think about this. During the blackout, NASA's Deep Space Network showed a temporary rerouting of data to a secondary station in Canberra, Australia. That station wasn't scheduled to receive Psyche data. It was reserved for something called Project Aurora. There's no official record of what Aurora is. Some say it's a testbed for signal interpretation. Others believe it's the holding space for information deemed potentially destabilizing. That's government language for too strange to explain. Even after Psyche's signal returned, it was weaker, as if the probe had passed through something. A field, a burst, or maybe an artificial interference. The energy drop was measurable, consistent, and unaccounted for. Engineers noted the system was still functional, but not fully. It's like the machine had been touched by something that left a trace, invisible but lasting. Weeks later, when NASA finally released an edited video from the probe's cameras, there was a single frame, barely half a second long, that showed a shape. Not a sphere, not a rock, something with structure, edges, symmetry, light sources not caused by the sun. A handful of viewers paused and analyzed it frame by frame. The structure appeared triangular, with a faint blue aura along its base, almost like propulsion or energy bleed. The frame was gone in the next second, replaced by empty blackness. When people pointed it out online, NASA re-uploaded the video, this time without that frame. If you're still with me, take a second and make sure you're subscribed. These stories take hours to verify and even longer to tell right. Hit the like button so this video reaches more people who care about truth, and share it with someone who loves the mysteries of space as much as you do. Back to the image. One aerospace analyst slowed the frame even further and noticed something hidden in the metadata. The word classified embedded in the pixel layer. That's not normal. Metadata like that doesn't appear by accident. Someone added it there intentionally, almost like a watermark to keep track of what version of the video had been leaked. That single clue confirmed what many already suspected. The feed that went black didn't go dead. It was recording something we weren't meant to see. And maybe, just maybe, what NASA saw before that blackout wasn't just data corruption or interference. It was contact. When the feed finally came back online, it was like waking from a strange, uneasy dream. The official word was that routine maintenance had caused a temporary interruption in Psyche's signal. But the engineers who handled the data knew that wasn't true. There were anomalies, lines of corrupted code, packets of data that didn't match any known format. And buried inside that chaos was something else, something that shouldn't have been there. a small group of technicians, quietly working off hours, began decoding the fragments. They were expecting the usual: distorted telemetry, static, radiation interference. What they found instead stopped them cold. The data wasn't random. It was structured, repetitive, rhythmic, in a way that mimicked language. The pulses followed patterns that repeated every 47 seconds, too deliberate to be natural, too complex to be noise. When the data was converted into sound, it produced a deep, modulated hum. It didn't fade like a normal signal. It resonated, like a voice trying to speak through static. They ran it through filters, converting it into visual waves, and what appeared on the screen made them step back. The waveform wasn't just a line, it was a shape, a spiral, perfectly symmetrical, almost identical to the symbol used in ancient astronomical texts to represent origin. At first, the engineers thought it was coincidence, but the more they cleaned the data, the clearer the spiral became. It was as if something had imprinted its identity directly into the stream. Within hours, those fragments were flagged and sealed under a classification tag: Level 7, Restricted Signal Integrity. That's a tier used only when something's deemed too sensitive for civilian contractors. Once that label appears, access is revoked, and all outside communication must stop immediately. The engineers who first decoded the pattern were reassigned. Some say they were transferred to another division. Others believe they were simply silenced. But one of them, an anonymous source later referred to only as Delta, leaked a single sentence to a private channel before their clearance was revoked. It read, "The signal knew we were listening." That one line sent chills through everyone who saw it, because it implied intent, awareness, that whatever had produced those pulses wasn't just broadcasting, it was responding. The timing made it even stranger. The signal appeared exactly 2 minutes after the feed blackout began, as if waiting for the right moment when no one would be watching. Then, just before the connection returned to normal, the pattern faded, like someone hanging up mid-sentence. The Psyche probe didn't just lose contact, it had a conversation. Now, let's pause for a moment here. If you're enjoying this deep dive into space's strangest mysteries, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. It helps more people find this story and lets us keep bringing you the truth that others won't talk about. Back to the story. A few weeks after the blackout, a file appeared briefly on a NASA data mirror, likely uploaded by mistake. It was titled Echo Packet Alpha. The file lasted less than 10 minutes before being deleted, but during that short window, 2 researchers downloaded a copy. Inside were compressed audio bursts labeled Atlas Return Fragments. When played at 1/10 speed, they revealed an eerie resonance, almost like breathing. Not mechanical, not digital, organic, rhythmic, human, in a way that made no sense at all. Acoustic experts later confirmed that the harmonics in that pattern matched the exact frequency range of a human male voice, roughly 100 to 120 Hz. But it wasn't speech. It was closer to the tonal patterns used in early number-based languages. Primitive communication, designed for clarity across noise. If you map those pulses to numbers, they correspond to coordinates in space. Coordinates pointing back, not to our solar system, but to the Perseus arm of the Milky Way. That's where things become even harder to explain, because that same region, the Perseus arm, is where the mysterious signal known as the Perseus echo was detected by radio telescopes decades ago. A repeating transmission that no one ever identified. And now, suddenly, Psyche's corrupted feeds seem to mirror that same exact pattern. The odds of that happening by chance are beyond astronomical. Some began to speculate that 3i Atlas wasn't just an interstellar visitor. It was a messenger, or perhaps a probe itself, designed not to crash into planets or burn in sunlight, but to pass by, to listen, to send a message when someone finally looked close enough. The signal Psyche intercepted wasn't a coincidence, it was a reply. At least that's what the evidence suggests. But the official response from NASA never changed. No unusual signal activity detected. No anomalies recorded. Yet behind closed doors, agencies around the world started quietly coordinating. The European Space Agency scheduled emergency crosslink tests. China delayed their planned satellite launches. Even amateur astronomers noticed that specific star tracking systems went offline without explanation. It's as if the world agreed. Whatever Psyche saw, no one should see again. And yet, fragments still leaked. Private networks shared decoded spectrograms that appeared to contain faint geometric imprints. Some described the pattern as looking like a fingerprint made of light. The meaning of that is still unknown. Was it a signature, a mark of origin, or a warning? People began asking, was 3i Atlas trying to communicate with us, or with something else? Could Psyche have been caught in the middle of a dialogue not meant for human ears? Because if that's true, then we weren't listening to a message. We were intercepting it. And if what Psyche captured really was intentional, then the blackout wasn't about hiding a malfunction. It was about preventing the world from hearing what came through. That's why even now, months later, NASA hasn't released the full raw telemetry from that day. Every version the public sees is edited, every log reviewed, every question answered with silence. And the deeper people dig, the clearer it becomes. Whatever passed through Psyche that day, it changed something in the data, something in the frequency, something in the way the probe itself behaves. It's subtle, but it's there. If you plot Psyche's signal amplitude before and after the blackout, you'll notice a shift, a small, repeating pulse that wasn't there before. It's consistent, intentional, almost like a heartbeat, and every time it loops, it aligns perfectly with the orbital path of 3i Atlas. That means Psyche, the machine we built, might now be carrying something inside its signal. A fragment of the message, still echoing through space. When the pattern inside Psyche's returning data became undeniable, a small team of researchers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory decided to run a private experiment. They wanted to know if the pulse that appeared after the blackout was just a random glitch, or if it might actually mean something. Using archived data from Psyche's transmissions, they reconstructed the signal sequence exactly as it appeared the first time. It was faint, only a few microseconds long, but the rhythm was unmistakable. Every time it repeated, the amplitude curved into the same spiral pattern. They programmed a transmitter to send it back, an exact echo of what Psyche had received. No one expected anything to happen. It was just supposed to be a harmless replication. The moment they sent the first broadcast, a strange feedback appeared on their monitors. The noise floor spiked for less than a second, then dropped into a silence so deep it didn't even register as static. The room fell quiet. One of the technicians thought the system had crashed. But then, at 1943 UTC, the instruments began to register a response. The pulse returned, same frequency, same structure, but altered, as if answering back. It wasn't an identical reflection. It was shifted slightly lower in tone, modulated, changed by something out there. The signal had traveled through open space, across millions of miles, and somehow come back different. The first reaction was disbelief. They double-checked every cable, every algorithm, every source of interference. The instruments were working perfectly. There was no physical way the echo could have bounced back. Space doesn't reflect like that. It absorbs, scatters, disperses. For the pulse to return almost instantly, something out there had to be actively sending it back. And the timing, the precision, made it impossible to dismiss as coincidence. As they replayed the data, they noticed something even stranger. The new version of the signal included brief interruptions, tiny pauses that didn't exist before. When mapped to binary, those pauses formed a repeating pattern that matched a timestamp, the exact time and date of the original blackout. It was like the signal itself was aware of when the event had occurred, as if it was referencing a shared memory between the probe and the unknown source. For the scientists in that room, the realization hit all at once. Whatever Psyche had connected with during the blackout wasn't just another star or a field of cosmic radiation. It was something that could listen, remember, and respond. One of the lead analysts described it later in an anonymous forum post, saying, "It felt like we said hello, and something finally said it back." Within hours of that test, the lab's secure network was locked. The project leads were contacted by officials from multiple agencies, and every piece of recorded data was transferred to an encrypted government server. The researchers were told not to discuss the event and to treat it as classified anomaly material. To this day, that session's raw feed has never been publicly released. But word got out. Someone leaked a screenshot from one of the oscilloscope readings, a faint blue waveform shaped into a mirrored spiral. Amateur astronomers began speculating that the feedback had come from an uncharted object positioned near the heliopause, the outer edge of the solar system where the sun's influence fades. That's roughly the same region 3I Atlas was traveling through when Psyche's feed went dark. The implication was simple but chilling. 3I Atlas wasn't passing through space alone. It might have been part of a network, a relay of something far larger. Those who studied the leaked image pointed out another disturbing detail. If you overlay the signal's frequency pattern on a star map, it lines up almost perfectly with the coordinates of the Perseus arm, the same region where the original signal appeared to originate. It wasn't random. The spiral was pointing somewhere like a cosmic compass, and each time the pulse repeated, it grew slightly stronger, as though something was drawing energy from the act of being noticed. Around that same period, several observatories around the world reported brief, unexplained power surges. Their automated systems picked up spikes in background radiation that matched Psyche's signal frequency, even though none of them were aimed at the same target. Some astronomers compared the readings and realized that the timing of these spikes followed a pattern, occurring every 47 seconds, the same rhythm first detected by Psyche's engineers. That's when a few of the older scientists began to worry. They recognized that pattern not from recent missions, but from data collected decades earlier during the Voyager era. Back then, faint rhythmic pulses were occasionally recorded beyond Pluto, dismissed as interference. But if you overlay those old pulses with Psyche's new data, they sync perfectly. Whatever's behind this has been active for decades, maybe longer. People started to ask a new question. What if 3I Atlas didn't bring the signal with it? What if it simply awakened something that was already here? Now imagine the weight of that thought sinking in at NASA headquarters. A pattern older than any probe, older than any mission, repeating itself through time, waiting to be recognized. It's the kind of thing that changes how you think about space, not as empty, but as aware. Every message we send, every signal we bounce into the void might not be drifting unnoticed. It might be heard. The private team that first triggered the return transmission stopped their tests after that night. The risk felt too great. The following week, they received orders to destroy all data backups and wipe their experimental hardware, but one of the junior engineers didn't comply. They saved a small fragment of the response on a private drive. Months later, that fragment surfaced anonymously online under the file name echo47.wav. When played, it sounds like a low, distant hum, slowly rising and falling like breathing. Listeners describe it as unsettling, familiar, almost human, the kind of sound that makes you feel like something is listening back. If you've been enjoying this story so far, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and lets us keep uncovering the mysteries NASA won't talk about. When Echo 47 was analyzed by independent experts, they found hidden harmonics deep within the audio spectrum, frequencies that only appear in natural sound environments, like wind through metal or air moving through a tunnel. That's impossible for a digital transmission, meaning whatever responded to Psyche wasn't synthetic. It was something that used physics itself to communicate. And here's where things get even stranger. The same harmonic pattern was later detected in background noise from other deep space probes. Voyager 2, Cassini, and even New Horizons. Each had recorded brief anomalies in their communications, all dismissed as technical noise. But now, with this new context, it seems those events may not have been random at all. It's as if something out there has been waiting for us to notice, using our own machines as messengers. That's what makes 3i Atlas more than a comet. It's a trigger, a reminder that we might not be the only ones capable of listening. And when we finally send the right signal, space might just answer back. The morning after the blackout data was sealed, a quiet tension settled over NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. In the hallways, engineers avoided eye contact. The few who knew about the Psyche transmission avoided speaking altogether, even among colleagues they trusted. Access logs had been restricted overnight. Computer terminals that had been open the day before now required new credentials, temporary, expiring every hour. It wasn't just an internal precaution. It felt like something larger, an order from far above. The official explanation was vague. Routine data security maintenance during government transition. But no one believed it. Inside the communications wing, the monitors showed nothing unusual. Rows of calm blue telemetry streams, distant probes quietly pinging their expected data. Yet behind those screens, there was a void, a gap in the recorded timeline that no one was allowed to fill in. Psyche's transmissions during the blackout were listed as data unavailable. What had been an open research feed was now locked behind encryption keys known only to a few administrators. The blackout hadn't ended when the cameras came back on. It had simply shifted from space to the servers. At first, NASA tried to manage the situation internally. A private review team was assembled, supposedly to determine whether the event was caused by a cosmic interference anomaly. They were told to treat it as a standard malfunction analysis, but when the team requested access to Psyche's raw telemetry logs, they were told that part of the data had already been transferred to federal archives. That phrase made the scientists uneasy. They knew what it meant: classified. Once data went into that system, it never came back. Still, word travels fast among researchers. Someone inside the review team leaked a brief message to a journalist who covered space policy. "We lost more than data." That line appeared on a small independent science blog, quickly deleted, but not before screenshots circulated. Within hours, the speculation began. People thought maybe NASA had captured images of an unknown object, maybe an alien craft, maybe something artificial. NASA's Public Affairs Office dismissed the claims immediately, calling them misinterpretations of technical downtime. But then, one of the archived public servers temporarily displayed a file name for a missing data packet: Atlas Contact Log 47B. That small detail set the internet on fire. Contact log wasn't a phrase NASA used casually. Forums lit up with theories. Amateur analysts started matching the file name to earlier leaks, particularly the mysterious Echo 47.wav sound file. The similarity between the numbers 47B and 47 wasn't missed. To online investigators, it was confirmation that both events were connected. Within days, the story grew too big to contain. Major outlets began quietly requesting statements. NASA issued a brief response saying Psyche had experienced a temporary communication interruption and that no anomalous objects or signals were detected. But that only fueled more suspicion, because while NASA said no anomalies, the European Space Agency confirmed that during the same blackout period, their deep space antennas picked up an unidentified narrowband frequency spike coming from Psyche's direction. When asked about it, ESA scientists refused to elaborate. They simply said they were coordinating with partners in the United States. That was when the public started to sense that something real had happened, something big enough to cross international lines. Inside, NASA, the few who had seen the unfiltered footage were shaken. According to one anonymous employee quoted later in a deleted forum post, Psyche's onboard cameras had captured something during the blackout, a silhouette against the stars, geometric, not natural. The transmission froze just as the image began to sharpen, and when the feed returned days later, the object was gone. That employee claimed the footage was wiped almost immediately, but a few still frames remained in temporary cache before being erased. Those frames, they said, showed something reflecting light, but not in the way rock or metal would. It seemed to shimmer, bending the background stars as if gravity itself was warping around it. The idea that 3I Atlas might not just be a comet anymore began to take hold. Theories shifted from the exotic to the terrifying. Some believed the object was artificial, perhaps a fragment of something much older, maybe even a probe itself. Others thought the blackout wasn't an accident at all. They said it was a deliberate attempt to stop a transmission from going public, one that would have changed everything about how humanity sees itself in the universe. As online chatter grew, NASA went silent. For nearly 2 weeks, no new press briefings were scheduled. Journalists who had been promised interviews suddenly received cancellations. Then, on a Friday evening, NASA quietly updated the Psyche mission page with one short entry. Data stream restored. Nominal operations resumed. That was it. No mention of the lost days. No mention of 3I Atlas. The omission spoke louder than any explanation could. Meanwhile, independent astronomers tried to locate 3I Atlas again, but it was already fading from detection. Its trajectory showed a slight change, subtle but measurable, a deviation that couldn't be explained by normal gravitational interactions. It was as if something had nudged it. When data from several observatories were compared, the deviation formed a curve that pointed back toward the same coordinates where Psyche's blackout had begun. It looked like a return path. One of the few scientists willing to speak on record was Dr. Owen Lasker, a theoretical physicist known for his cautious skepticism. He said, "If the reports are accurate, this could represent the first instance of a communication attempt initiated by an interstellar object. But if that's true, it also means it was aware we were watching." His words were quoted only once before being removed from most online archives, but the phrase stuck. It was aware we were watching. That idea spread across forums and podcasts, fueling a movement among amateur astronomers who began scanning the region of space near the last known coordinates of 3I Atlas. They called it the listening field. Using homemade radio dishes and hacked signal analyzers, they started detecting faint rhythmic pulses, some eerily similar to Psyche's final transmission. Most were probably static, but a few carried that same spiral frequency pattern found in the earlier leaks. Those who heard it described an odd emotional reaction. It wasn't fear exactly, but a deep, instinctive unease. Some said it felt like standing in a silent room and realizing someone else was breathing with you. For NASA, the growing public obsession was a problem. Funding for the Psyche mission had already been tied up in political debates, and the mention of a blackout cover-up wasn't helping. Internal memos revealed frustration from upper management, scientists accused of fueling conspiracy theories, journalists accused of sensationalizing speculation. But through all the noise, one fact remained. The missing days of Psyche's data had never been released, and no one outside a small circle of officials knew what those files contained. Then, late one night, another signal appeared, shorter this time, but unmistakably similar to the earlier transmissions. It didn't come from Psyche, though. It came from the direction of Earth's own orbit, as if something had moved closer, and that's when everything changed. When the signal appeared again, it didn't come from the depths of space. It came from within our own cosmic neighborhood. The first detection wasn't by NASA or the European Space Agency. It came from an amateur radio observatory in Arizona. A retired engineer named Robert Hale had been tracking high-frequency anomalies ever since the original Psyche blackout. Late one night, his homemade array picked up a pulse pattern so clean, so intentional that he thought it had to be a calibration test from a satellite. But when he checked the direction of origin, his system pointed not toward any known satellite orbit. It pointed toward the same coordinates where 3I Atlas had last been seen, now much closer to Earth's orbital path. At first, he assumed it was a glitch, but after hours of testing, the signal repeated itself. Every 47 minutes, the same 3 narrowband pulses followed by silence. Hale uploaded his readings to an open astronomy forum, expecting curiosity, maybe a few jokes. Instead, he got a visit. Within 2 days, the thread disappeared, and his post was replaced with a notice about data integrity concerns. He later said that 2 officials claiming to represent a federal research program came to his home, politely asking for his hard drives for verification. He never got them back. Meanwhile, NASA's Deep Space Network began showing signs of interference. Several antennas reported intermittent static bursts that looked like interference, but didn't match any terrestrial sources. These bursts increased every night, right as the region of space once occupied by 3I Atlas rose above the horizon. Technicians tried adjusting filters, swapping frequencies, recalibrating receivers. Nothing stopped the interruptions. Then, during a late-night maintenance window, one of the operators noticed something unsettling. The static wasn't random. It was rhythmic, structured, echoing the same pulse. Interval Robert Hale had reported before his post. Vanished. That was when NASA quietly declared what they called a signal containment exercise. All external data access from the Deep Space Network was suspended. Contractors were told to work offline. All recordings had to be encrypted, and no live feeds were allowed. Officially, this was described as preventative cybersecurity testing. But insiders knew better. NASA was trying to contain the signal before it spread to civilian networks. They didn't want another leak. Still, information found its way out. A systems technician, who later went missing after posting anonymously, claimed that the rhythmic bursts contained embedded digital structure, tiny fluctuations resembling binary encoding. According to his notes, when plotted visually, the data formed a recurring spiral shape that resembled the Atlas object's trajectory through the solar system. It wasn't noise. It was a pattern. As the pattern grew stronger, something else began to happen. Observatories across Europe and South America started noticing minor but consistent fluctuations in the solar wind readings. Small deviations synchronized with the pulse intervals. It was as if the sun itself was reacting to the signal. Some dismissed it as coincidence, a quirk of solar activity, but others thought differently. If 3I Atlas, or whatever it truly was, had the ability to emit energy strong enough to influence the solar field, then humanity might be dealing with something far beyond a comet. Publicly, NASA still denied any connection between the Psyche blackout and the signal interference. But behind closed doors, an emergency task force was formed, involving NASA, the Department of Defense, and representatives from the National Reconnaissance Office. The group's mission was simple: monitor the signal, trace its source, and determine if it posed any risk to Earth or communications infrastructure. But privately, some believed it was too late for monitoring. They needed to prepare for contact. When the pulses suddenly stopped, the silence was almost worse. For 3 days, there was nothing. No data, no interference, no anomalies. It was as if the signal had never existed. But on the 4th day, something changed. A deep space probe near the edge of Mars's orbit, the aging MAVEN satellite, detected a faint transmission on a frequency it wasn't even designed to monitor. It came through one of its backup sensors as a harmonic distortion, repeating the same 3 pulses followed by a long tone that decayed slowly, like a fading heartbeat. When NASA engineers analyzed the MAVEN data, they found that the distortion wasn't random. It contained a modulation pattern identical to Psyche's last recorded broadcast before the blackout. Somehow, the same signal had reappeared nearly 100 million miles away, perfectly timed with Earth's alignment to the Atlas trajectory. It wasn't just repeating, it was following us. The analysts debated what it meant. Some thought it was an echo, a reflection of Psyche's last transmission bouncing off interplanetary dust fields. But others noticed something strange. Each repetition of the signal contained slight phase shifts, as if it was adjusting, listening, learning how to refine itself with every echo. A program designed to mimic and adapt could do that. A natural phenomenon could not. As the data came in, one of the technicians reportedly whispered, "It's mapping us." He wasn't supposed to say that out loud, but the room went silent. The model on the screen showed the signal's point of origin shifting in a curved path that now intersected Earth's orbit. Whatever was sending it wasn't drifting randomly through space. It was steering. Then came the final trigger, a shortwave anomaly detected simultaneously by 3 ground stations. It was brief, less than a second, but unmistakable. The pulse sequence ended with a low-frequency burst that matched the magnetic resonance of Earth's upper atmosphere. It was the first and only time a deep space signal had directly synchronized with a terrestrial magnetic frequency. The implications were staggering. NASA classified all related data within hours. Civilian observatories that tried to report similar findings had their public feeds temporarily taken offline. Even amateur radio astronomers found their access to frequency bands jammed. The official explanation given later was solar, interference from an ongoing flare cycle. But the sun was unusually calm that week. That was when the phrase signal lockdown began appearing in leaked memos. It referred to the coordinated effort to suppress or redirect public data access whenever the signal appeared. The fear wasn't that it was dangerous in a physical sense. It was that the knowledge of it could cause panic, especially after the Psyche blackout. But despite every measure to silence the story, the signal's existence couldn't be erased. Too many independent recordings, too many archives, too many ears had already heard it. And now, scientists weren't asking if it was real. They were asking what it wanted. When the blackout ended and the Psyche feed flickered back to life, NASA released a carefully edited statement claiming data corruption during transmission. To most people, that explanation was enough. But to those who knew how these systems worked, it didn't make sense. Psyche's data backup protocols were redundant, spread across multiple transmission bands, each with separate timing logs. For every packet to vanish simultaneously, it would take deliberate human intervention or a precise, intelligent interference. Either way, the data was gone, or at least that's what they wanted the public to believe. A few weeks later, an anonymous upload appeared on an encrypted astrophysics forum. It contained what the poster claimed were partial frame reconstructions from Psyche's corrupted data. The images were faint, grainy, and almost abstract, but they weren't random static. When cleaned and enhanced, they showed the faint outline of an object reflecting light in strange geometric patterns. Unlike any cometary nucleus ever seen, this surface wasn't irregular or dusty. It appeared smooth, like polished stone or metal, with curved sections that caught sunlight at impossible angles. It looked engineered. The thread went viral in private circles before being deleted within hours, but not before several users mirrored the files and passed them through independent AI reconstruction tools. The results revealed even more unsettling details. In some frames, the object's reflected light formed repeating hexagonal patterns, as if the surface was divided into symmetrical panels. One user noticed what appeared to be motion within the reflection, a flicker, as if something inside the object was shifting or rotating. If the data was real, Psyche had captured something alive, or at least active, within 3i Atlas. NASA never acknowledged the leak, but soon after, an internal memo surfaced that mentioned uncontrolled data dissemination relating to Object 3i Atlas. It instructed all personnel to refrain from discussing image anomalies with outside researchers. The memo was dated 3 days before the images appeared online. Someone inside had known the leak was coming. Someone inside wanted it to be seen. For independent scientists who got their hands on the reconstructed frames, one feature stood out: a circular pattern near the object's center, where reflected sunlight seemed to bend, not scatter. The physics of that were nearly impossible under known conditions. To bend light in that way, the surface would need to possess either extreme gravitational influence or advanced refractive control, like a lens that could redirect photons deliberately. One researcher from Caltech described it as optical camouflage at a cosmic scale. He theorized that 3I Atlas wasn't a solid object at all, but a hollow structure with an inner system designed to absorb and manipulate energy. But then came another leak, this time from within NASA's Deep Space Network. A technician released a short, audio-filtered clip said to be the raw data converted to sound. The recording lasted just 12 seconds, a low hum followed by a strange harmonic vibration, almost musical in tone. Analysts found that when plotted visually, the waveform matched the same 3-pulse rhythm of the earlier interference pattern. The object wasn't just reflecting light, it was emitting energy in precise rhythmic intervals. That discovery changed everything. Suddenly, the idea that Psyche's blackout was a technical glitch became absurd. The timing of the feed loss perfectly matched the moment Psyche's high-resolution camera entered its closest observation window. It wasn't that the signal failed. It was as if something didn't want to be seen. Inside NASA, panic gave way to quiet awe. The internal analysis teams debated whether they were observing the first evidence of an alien probe or something else, something far older, perhaps dormant for eons until our technology finally noticed it. A few scientists floated the possibility that 3I Atlas could be a remnant of a long-dead civilization, drifting for millions of years until gravitational currents brought it back into view. Others weren't so sure. The motion seen in the reflections, the signal's rhythmic pulse, it all suggested awareness. Meanwhile, the US Department of Defense began inserting itself more directly into the investigation. The official explanation was national security. If a foreign signal could interfere with a NASA transmission, it might also threaten communications infrastructure. But quietly, they launched their own classified analysis, tasking contractors to reconstruct Psyche's missing frames using electromagnetic interpolation. Those reconstructions, later leaked by whistleblowers, revealed something no one expected. Hidden in one of the recovered frames was what looked like an image of Psyche itself. Its solar panels reflected clearly against the object's surface, but in the reflection, Psyche's silhouette appeared distorted, stretched toward the center of the object, as if space itself was bending inward. Behind it, faintly visible in the warped light, was a circular void, black, perfectly symmetrical, and ringed with faint luminous arcs. It wasn't just a reflection, it was a window. One analyst described the moment he realized what he was seeing. The object wasn't just reflecting Psyche, it was showing us something behind it, like a mirror with depth, like we were looking through, not at, the surface. Whatever the object was, it wasn't behaving according to any known law of optics. It was as if it existed in multiple planes at once. NASA moved swiftly after that. All internal access to the Psyche archives was revoked. Contractors were told to delete their local data. External review requests were denied. The official stance remained: transmission error due to solar interference. But even the engineers who had worked on Psyche's imaging systems privately admitted that such a failure was impossible. The timing, the precision, the perfect blackout, it all pointed to a deliberate act of concealment. Then, a final twist. A small group of independent researchers, comparing timestamps from the leaked images, noticed that the object's light intensity fluctuated in harmony with the pulses detected from Earth weeks earlier. That meant one thing. Whatever had interfered with Psyche wasn't random. It was synchronized. The The same entity or force that disrupted the probe was now emitting a pattern detectable from our planet. The blackout and the signal were part of the same event. To some, it meant communication. To others, a warning. Whatever it was, NASA's silence was deafening. And as the world's most powerful space agencies pretended nothing unusual had happened, the truth was spreading quietly through encrypted networks. Psyche had seen something it wasn't supposed to see, and for a brief moment before everything went dark, it had recorded evidence that could change how humanity understands its place in the cosmos. As days turned into weeks, something strange began to happen. Astronomers who had been tracking 3I Atlas noticed that its projected path was no longer matching predictions. When it first entered the solar system, its orbit seemed consistent with an object simply falling under the pull of gravity, curving naturally as it passed near the sun before being flung back into deep space. But now, subtle deviations were starting to appear. Tiny, almost imperceptible changes in direction, too precise and too rhythmic to be caused by random outgassing or solar winds. It was as if the object was correcting its own course. At first, NASA tried to attribute it to cometary activity, jets of gas pushing against the surface, creating thrust. But the data didn't fit that explanation. The changes in trajectory occurred in perfect intervals, repeating every 36 hours. That kind of timing wasn't natural. Even more troubling was the fact that each adjustment seemed to line up with a specific point in space, as if the object were following invisible waypoints. Scientists began to notice that these points corresponded with areas rich in gravitational anomalies, places where space-time slightly warps due to massive unseen structures like dark matter, concentrations or long-dead stellar remnants. It was as though 3I Atlas was navigating a path through these distortions intentionally, using them like stepping stones. When independent astronomers attempted to publish their findings, many reported that their posts were flagged or removed within hours. Others said their access to telescope data was suddenly restricted. It was unusual behavior for what should have been an open scientific discussion. That censorship only deepened suspicion that NASA and other agencies knew more than they were admitting. Inside private research groups, quiet conversations began. If the object was adjusting its own course, then it wasn't behaving like a comet. It was behaving like a craft. One astrophysicist from the European Space Agency ran simulations using the newly observed trajectory changes. What he found left him speechless. When he plotted the altered path over time, the line formed a distinct spiral pattern, not random at all. Each loop of the spiral intersected specific orbital positions of major planets, including Mars, Earth, and Jupiter. And if projected forward, the spiral's path appeared to converge on a single destination, an empty region between Earth's orbit and the asteroid belt, a place with no known objects of interest, unless, of course, there was something there we hadn't yet seen. That possibility sent quiet ripples through the community. The idea that 3I Atlas might be traveling toward a deliberate point in space, as though rendezvousing with something unseen, was too unsettling for most to accept publicly. NASA avoided the topic altogether, issuing only vague statements about unexpected but natural trajectory deviations. But behind closed doors, they began repositioning several deep space monitoring satellites to focus on the area ahead of 3I Atlas's new path. They weren't taking any chances. The strangest part was what happened next. Amateur astronomers, using high-powered backyard telescopes, began reporting strange flickers of light near the object, brief flashes that looked like reflections or energy bursts. When these were time-stamped and compared, they matched perfectly with the same 36-hour rhythm of the object's course changes. It wasn't random. Every time the object altered direction, it released a burst of energy strong enough to reflect sunlight hundreds of millions of miles away. Those flashes raised another question. If 3I Atlas was using energy bursts to move or steer itself, what was the source of that power? Solar energy seemed unlikely. The object was far from the sun. and the intensity of the bursts was far greater than anything solar reflection could produce. Radio observatories listening in on its location detected faint electromagnetic pulses, narrow in frequency, but repeating with mathematical precision. When decoded, the signal contained patterns consistent with binary counting, numbers. That meant intention. That meant design. Within days, the topic spread across underground scientific channels. Some believed the object was sending a message. Others suspected it was a beacon, marking its position for something else to find. The debate grew more intense when several space agencies suddenly classified all data related to the object's movement. The official reasons cited potential interference with deep space communications. But those who had been watching since the beginning knew better. Something was happening that no one was supposed to talk about. A week later, a small team of independent astronomers from Chile managed to capture high-resolution time-lapse images of the object during one of its adjustment periods. When they layered the images over each other, a pattern emerged, not just a change in direction, but a controlled arc, like a slow turn executed with precision. The motion was smooth, deliberate, and ended exactly where the next predicted gravitational anomaly would occur. It wasn't drifting, it was navigating. Then came the revelation that shook everyone. The same Chilean team detected a faint heat signature trailing behind the object during one of the adjustments. In the cold vacuum of space, heat dissipates quickly, but this was sustained, lasting several minutes. That indicated propulsion of some kind. A comet outgassing from one side would show random, uneven bursts. This was directional, almost like a controlled burn. It wasn't nature. It was something built. When NASA's own infrared satellites confirmed the readings days later, all public data about 3I Atlas's position was suddenly delayed by 48 hours. The justification was to ensure data accuracy. But that delay ensured that anyone outside official channels could no longer track the object in real time. From that point on, all new information about its path came exclusively from government releases. The transparency was gone, replaced by a silence that felt deliberate. Meanwhile, something else changed. Observers noticed the object's brightness fluctuating in odd ways, pulses of light that didn't align with solar angles or distance. Some described it as a heartbeat, a slow rhythmic glow that seemed to pulse once every few minutes. As the object drew nearer to its next predicted anomaly, the pulses increased in speed, almost like anticipation. It was as if the object was preparing for something, gathering energy before its next move. Then, on a cold October night, astronomers across multiple continents reported seeing the object suddenly accelerate. Not slightly, but drastically. Within a matter of hours, its velocity doubled, then tripled, defying every known law of celestial mechanics. No natural force in the area could have caused that. The only explanation was propulsion. Something inside 3I Atlas had activated, and once again, as if on cue, NASA's tracking feed went offline. The official statement that followed was short and clinical. Unexpected solar interference has temporarily disrupted telemetry. But those who had been watching for months recognized the pattern. Every time the object did something unexplainable, the signal went dark. The question no one could answer was simple. Who or what was piloting it? And if it wasn't moving by accident, where exactly was it going? Not long after 3I Atlas's sudden burst of acceleration, the instruments at several deep space observatories started picking up something unusual. Gravitational waves, faint but unmistakable. At first, they thought it was a technical glitch, perhaps background noise from distant supernova activity or a calibration error. But the pattern kept repeating, and it wasn't coming from millions of light years away. It was coming from the same region of space where 3I Atlas had just vanished from real-time tracking. The waves pulsed in rhythmic intervals, steady, patterned, and growing stronger each time they passed. Gravitational waves usually occur when massive objects like black holes collide, warping the fabric of space-time itself. Yet what these observatories were seeing didn't match any known cosmic event. These were precise, controlled pulses, as if something was deliberately disturbing the field around it. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory quietly confirmed the readings, but only in internal memos. Publicly, they denied anything out of the ordinary. Behind the scenes, though, emergency data links were opened between LIGO in the United States, Virgo in Italy, and Kagra in Japan. All three detectors reported the same exact pattern. The waves were faint, yes, but coordinated, repeating every 22 minutes. That was impossible for a natural event, and what made it even stranger was how localized it was. The waves were only affecting a small sector of the sky, precisely the area 3I Atlas had entered just days before. Some scientists suggested that perhaps the object had interacted with a field of dark matter, or some unknown anomaly in the interplanetary medium. But others weren't so sure. The symmetry of the pulses, the near-perfect timing, made it look less like an accident and more like a signal. A kind of ripple-based communication, traveling through the very fabric of the universe. When plotted on a graph, the amplitude of the waves formed an elegant spiral pattern, eerily similar to the trajectory map from Chapter 11. The resemblance was too perfect to ignore. At this point, several agencies began working together under a program that was never publicly announced. NASA, ESA, and even JAXA redirected several deep space probes, including one that had been dormant for years, to scan the region from different angles. But before any new data could be confirmed, all signals from those probes were suddenly encrypted. The explanation was routine system maintenance. The timing was anything but routine. Meanwhile, the civilian space community grew restless. Amateur radio astronomers started to notice something else, a background hum in the microwave band that had begun around the same time as the gravitational waves. It wasn't a random hiss of cosmic radiation. It had structure, modulated patterns that hinted at encoded information. When one group in Canada ran the data through audio processing software, the resulting output sounded hauntingly like a deep, slow heartbeat echoing through the void, a living rhythm in space. As more data leaked, the pattern became clear. Every 22 minutes, 3I Atlas, or whatever it had become, released a pulse of gravitational energy, followed by a faint electromagnetic echo. The synchronization between the two suggested coordination, like an engine firing and sending ripples through both physical and electromagnetic space. To those monitoring it, it was as though the object had entered a different mode of operation, a state beyond propulsion. Something about it had changed. NASA insiders reportedly began referring to the anomaly as the gate in internal communications. It wasn't an official name, but it fit, because soon after those waves began, instruments around the world detected a temporary bending of light near the region. Stars in the background appeared to shift slightly, as if space itself were warping. For a brief window, less than 12 minutes, there was evidence of a gravitational lens effect, the kind normally caused by supermassive objects like black holes. But when the readings normalized, nothing was left behind. The stars returned to their normal positions, and 3I Atlas was nowhere to be found. That disappearance caused panic within certain circles of the scientific community. No natural object simply vanishes without trace. But when NASA's Psyche probe tried to reacquire the signal, it couldn't. Not a single piece of reflected light, not a radio echo, nothing. It was as though the object had slipped out of the solar system entirely, not just out of sight, but out of existence. Some theorized that it had entered a wormhole or a spatial fold, though no such phenomena had ever been directly observed before. Others thought it might have used the gravitational field as a propulsion sling, accelerating to a velocity faster than detection limits. But that still didn't explain the repeating waves that continued for weeks after the object vanished. As time passed, the pattern began to decay. The pulses weakened, and their intervals stretched slightly, like the dying rhythm of a heartbeat slowing down. Some scientists said this was simply the echo of a massive event that had already happened. But others believed the waves weren't fading, they were moving, When plotted again, the source point seemed to be drifting outward from the original coordinates, like a signal traveling away from the solar system, getting fainter as it went. That meant whatever had caused the event was still active, just farther away now. Meanwhile, certain archived images from the Psyche mission began circulating on encrypted servers. One of them showed something faint in the background, a circular distortion, not visible in any previous captures. It looked like a shimmering ring of light, translucent but defined, hovering near where 3i Atlas was last seen. When enhanced, the image revealed faint streaks radiating outward from the ring, like energy being drawn inward and released outward in waves. Some described it as an eye, wide open in the darkness, staring back toward the inner planets. NASA, when asked to comment, dismissed the image as processing artifacts, but for those who had seen the raw data, that explanation didn't hold up. Across social media, whispers spread. People began calling it the Eye of Atlas, claiming that the object hadn't vanished. It had crossed over into another dimension of space, leaving behind a scar where it once was. The gravitational ripples, they said, were proof that the boundary between our reality and something else had briefly opened. Some even connected it to ancient records of unexplained astronomical phenomena. Strange lights, sudden disappearances of stars in ancient Chinese and Mayan sky charts. Could those have been similar events, temporary openings in the fabric of reality, visible only for a moment before closing forever? The unsettling part was that the same 22-minute gravitational pattern began to reappear weeks later, but from a different part of the sky. This time, it came from the direction of the Orion Arm, the very region where researchers had once speculated 3i Atlas might have originated. The cycle had come full circle. Whatever 3i Atlas was, it wasn't gone. It had simply gone home. When the familiar pulse returned, this time from the Orion Arm, many at NASA refused to believe it at first. It had been weeks since the last signal faded, and they had all assumed 3i Atlas was gone forever. Yet the readings were clear and consistent. A faint gravitational rhythm every 22 minutes, identical in strength, frequency and waveform to the one previously tracked. Only now, the signal came from billions of miles farther away, in a direction no one expected. It was as if something had traveled across the galaxy and decided to call back. This new signal caused quiet chaos in the scientific community. The same private network that linked NASA, ESA, and JAXA was reactivated under what insiders called Project Echo. The goal was simple but chilling: to determine if the pattern contained information. They suspected the pulses weren't random, and for the first time they began decoding them like a message. The rhythm of each wave wasn't perfectly uniform. There were tiny fluctuations in timing, fractions of a second off, which could have been meaningless or deliberate. Data scientists began to assign binary values to the timing differences, and the results were too structured to be coincidence. The gravitational wave pattern translated into a repeating mathematical sequence, prime numbers arranged in ascending order. It was elegant, unmistakable, and impossible to attribute to a natural phenomenon. The universe doesn't count, intelligence does. Once this discovery leaked among a handful of trusted researchers, the meaning sank in. Whatever 3i Atlas was, it had left behind a coded signal. It wasn't just passing through space, it was trying to communicate. NASA didn't release the findings publicly, of course. The official explanation for any activity detected from that region remained instrument calibration noise. But in private meetings, one phrase kept appearing in notes and internal memos: the sequence is recursive. That meant the signal wasn't simply a message being repeated. It was adjusting itself in response to observation. The moment scientists predicted the next pulse, the timing changed slightly, like the sender was aware of being studied. It was responding. At the SETI Institute in California, a small team of astrophysicists decided to run the gravitational data through an acoustic conversion system. a tool designed to translate radio signals into audible sound. What they heard was something haunting. The rhythmic pulse translated into deep, resonant tones that almost resembled a slow, methodical breathing pattern. It would swell gently, fade, then rise again, exactly 22 minutes apart. Some described it as the sound of something alive, moving and thinking across the void. One researcher, who asked not to be named, described it as the closest thing to a voice I've ever heard from space. The psychological impact of the discovery was intense. Imagine realizing that something not human, not even biological, might be aware of your presence and choosing to answer in the only universal language it could, mathematics. Yet as the weeks passed, the tone of the pulses began to shift. The intervals shortened slightly. The amplitude increased, and the prime number sequences began repeating in clusters instead of linear order. When the team mapped out these clusters visually, they formed spiral patterns. When overlaid on a star chart, the spirals pointed directly toward our solar system. It wasn't random, it was directional. If that realization wasn't alarming enough a few days later, new data from the Hubble Replacement Telescope, the James Webb, showed something incredible near the source of the gravitational pattern. There was movement, a faint reflection, moving faster than any known celestial body in that region. It wasn't debris, and it wasn't light from a star. Whatever it was moving in a trajectory that would eventually align with our solar plane within the next few months. For days, scientists argued about whether to publish the findings. Some believed it would cause unnecessary panic. Others insisted transparency was the only responsible choice. But before any formal decision could be made, several databases that contained raw observational data from the Orion region suddenly went offline. Public access was removed, and only authorized personnel could view archived logs. When reporters asked NASA about it, they were told it was routine cybersecurity maintenance. It was the same excuse given during the Psyche blackout. At this point, even the most skeptical astronomers began to notice the pattern, not in space, but in behavior. Every time something involving 3I Atlas surfaced, communications blacked out, data vanished, or feeds went dark. To them, it was no longer just a question of science. Someone was deliberately controlling what the public could know, and the reason became clearer when an independent astrophysicist in Chile managed to capture faint optical flashes from the Orion region that matched the timing of the gravitational pulses. These weren't random light bursts. They appeared to carry encoded information too. When translated into a time-frequency graph, the result was staggering. It looked like a countdown. The pattern repeated three numbers over and over, 72, 48, and 24. Each appeared for several cycles before fading and resetting. The numbers decreased steadily over the following days. No one knew what it was counting down to, but the fear grew that something significant was about to happen. Even without official confirmation, whispers began spreading online through encrypted channels. Some claimed the countdown corresponded to the object's projected re-entry into observable range. Others thought it represented an event, something that would unfold when the sequence hit zero. In private briefings, NASA engineers recalculated the trajectory of the moving reflection seen in the Webb telescope data. If it continued on its current path, it would intersect with Earth's orbital plane in approximately 72 days, the same number at the start of the countdown. It wasn't coming directly toward Earth, but it would pass close enough to observe, potentially close enough to interact. That revelation caused sleepless nights in mission control rooms. More curious still was how the object seemed to slow slightly as it approached the halfway mark of the countdown. Every interval of the gravitational signal began stretching, like a heart beating slower before a major exertion. It was as though it was preparing for something. Scientists debated if it was merely a gravitational braking effect or an intentional act of controlled deceleration. The distinction mattered, but no one could prove either. In the following weeks, the strange gravitational signature became visible in datasets from independent observatories all over the world. It was no longer deniable. Something large, dense, and organized was moving closer, pulsing in a rhythm too precise to be a natural event. And deep within the signal, embedded between the prime sequences, a new modulation appeared, one that, when analyzed, resembled the harmonic ratio of human speech frequencies. Not words, not language, but rhythm, a pulse that mimicked the cadence of communication. Even now, no one officially admits what the countdown was measuring. But as the number neared its end, and the signals grew louder, one thing became certain among those who were watching. Whatever 3i Atlas was, it wasn't finished with us. As the countdown ticked closer to zero, tension across every observatory on Earth grew heavier than ever. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, rooms once filled with casual chatter turned eerily silent. The only sounds were the faint hums of servers and the quiet clicking of keyboards as scientists ran simulations again and again, each trying to predict what would happen when the countdown reached its final mark. The strange rhythmic pulses from the Orion arm had now become so consistent that even amateur astronomers could detect faint traces of it. It was no longer just a secret locked behind closed doors. The world was beginning to notice. On social media, people started sharing synchronized spikes captured on independent telescopes. They didn't understand what it meant, but they felt it. Something big was coming. The energy around it was almost supernatural, the kind that makes you sense a storm before it hits. Meanwhile, NASA's internal data confirmed what everyone feared. The moving object was slowing down deliberately. The deceleration was too smooth, too precise. Natural objects don't do that. It was as if 3i Atlas, or whatever controlled it, was preparing to stop or to make itself visible. Then, exactly 72 hours before the predicted zero mark, NASA prepared the Psyche probe for a special maneuver. Officially, Psyche's mission was to study a metallic asteroid between Mars and Jupiter. Unofficially, its instruments had been recalibrated to capture deep space imagery of the exact sector where 3i Atlas was expected to appear. Every dish, every lens, every sensor was aligned to catch whatever emerged from that darkness. Engineers double-checked every failsafe, every power relay. The world didn't know it, but NASA was holding its breath. At 2:14 a.m. Eastern Time, Psyche sent its first transmission, a stable, clear feed showing the vast emptiness of space. For 2 minutes, everything looked normal. Then, without warning, the feed flickered. For less than a second, a shape appeared. A long, luminous form stretching across the field of view, partially illuminated by reflected sunlight. Analysts couldn't identify it. It wasn't a comet. It wasn't a spacecraft. The object seemed almost translucent, surrounded by a soft blue glow. Before they could capture a still frame, the feed went black. The blackout wasn't a brief technical glitch. It lasted for 72 full hours, exactly 3 days, the same number as the countdown's starting interval. During that time, no signal came from Psyche, and all secondary tracking systems failed simultaneously. Even ground-based radar arrays went silent. Some called it coincidence, others didn't. The few who were awake in the control center said it felt like the world itself had been muted. When the feed finally returned, Psyche's instruments were still functioning, but its orientation had changed. It was facing away from its original target, cameras tilted toward empty space. The telemetry logs showed no sign of mechanical malfunction or navigation error. The spacecraft had been rotated intentionally. And the strangest part, the radiation readings had spiked dramatically during the blackout period. Levels consistent with exposure to an intense but brief electromagnetic field. Something had interfered, not just with the probe, but with everything in its proximity. In the hours that followed, NASA's data servers were flooded with encrypted updates. Every image captured before the blackout was archived under restricted clearance, accessible only to a handful of senior officials. Internally, a memo circulated that read, "All data from Psyche's last maneuver is to be reviewed off-site. No public disclosure." That single line confirmed what many suspected. Something extraordinary had been recorded, something they didn't want anyone else to see. Outside of NASA, rumors spread like wildfire. Independent analysts noticed that the Deep Space Network's three major antennas, Goldstone in California, Madrid in Spain, and Canberra in Australia, all showed unusual downtime overlapping perfectly with Psyche's blackout window. These stations never go offline together unless ordered. It wasn't a malfunction, it was a deliberate silence. And for those who had been following the countdown, it was clear that something monumental had happened behind that silence. Then came the unexplainable global event. Just as Psyche's feed reconnected, several parts of the world experienced brief but synchronized power fluctuations. In major cities across the United States, Europe, and Asia, lights dimmed for a fraction of a second. Satellites in low Earth orbit reported data loss and signal interference. Even radio operators noticed an unusual static wave sweeping through communication bands, lasting precisely 22 minutes, the same interval as the gravitational pulse. It was as if the signal had passed directly through the Earth. That same night, multiple observatories recorded a faint visual anomaly near the constellation Orion. A circular distortion shimmered for a few seconds, almost like ripples in water before vanishing completely. To the untrained eye, it was nothing. To astronomers, it was terrifying. A gravitational lensing effect with no visible mass behind it. Something massive had moved through space, invisible but powerful enough to bend light. NASA didn't issue any official statement. Their social media feeds remained silent. Press briefings were cancelled, and routine updates replaced the scheduled broadcasts. But a few insiders quietly spoke to journalists off the record. One described the event as a perfect storm of data suppression. Another said, "We saw something that should not exist." But none of them could, or would, say more. Online forums exploded with theories. Some believed 3i Atlas wasn't a natural object but an artificial probe, possibly one scanning or mapping our solar system. Others thought it was a vessel, a fragment of something ancient and intelligent, testing our response. But what disturbed people most wasn't what they saw, it was what they didn't. The total blackout, the global silence, and the perfect timing all pointed to coordination, either from our side or something else's. When Psyche's data was finally partially restored, a small portion of its telemetry leaked through secondary data streams. It showed a dramatic drop in temperature sensors during the blackout, as if the probe had entered a shadow or region of deep space colder than physics should allow. Then, a sharp surge, heat rising almost instantly before stabilizing again. Some scientists interpreted it as evidence of a massive energy field passing nearby. Others said it was contact. Whatever the truth was, it changed something inside every person working that mission. Many who were part of the Psyche project quietly requested transfers or early retirement afterward. They said nothing publicly, but their silence spoke louder than words. And as the world went on with its ordinary life, unaware of how close we might have come to a revelation, the countdown quietly reset. The pulses from Orion began again, only this time the intervals had shortened. The message wasn't over. It was starting again. When the blackout finally ended, the world's news cycles had already moved on. To most people, Psyche's silence was nothing more than another technical glitch during the government shutdown. But inside NASA something was different. The data coming in wasn't the same as what had gone out. Telemetry logs showed gaps, missing timestamps where raw footage should have been stored. Entire minutes of recording had vanished from the probe's internal memory. Yet energy readings during that same window showed intense spikes across multiple sensors. It was as if the data had been erased while the probe was still transmitting. In the following days, a small internal review team was formed under the Deep Space Division. Their goal was simple: reconstruct the corrupted files and trace the source of the interference. The team worked in a locked lab, away from the main network, using isolated terminals. One of the engineers, a woman named Dr. Ava Holt, later admitted in a leaked email that what they found was not mechanical and not natural. She said the erased data had residual magnetic signatures, like someone had manually overwritten the files with new ones, but the source didn't match any NASA system. When they pieced together fragments from the damaged transmission, an eerie image began to emerge. At first, it looked like a smear of light, random noise created by sensor malfunction. But when they enhanced the frame-by-frame data, shapes started to appear, faint outlines, geometric in nature, not unlike the hexagonal storm patterns seen on Saturn, but sharper, almost engineered. There were perfect angles, repeating curves, and at the center, a faint pulse of light. It wasn't a comet tail. It wasn't dust. Whatever Psyche captured was structured. The deeper the team analyzed, the stranger it became. Every 37 seconds, the reconstructed image seemed to shift slightly, as if it were rotating or pulsating. And within those cycles, faint spectral frequencies aligned with the same pattern detected months earlier from the Orion pulses. The connection was undeniable. Somehow, whatever Psyche had encountered during the blackout was transmitting on the same wavelength as the deep space signal that started the countdown. NASA leadership grew nervous. Meetings turned confidential. The official story became that Psyche's instruments experienced unanticipated solar interference. But Dr. Holt and her team weren't convinced. The electromagnetic activity recorded wasn't solar, it was directional. The source came from behind the probe, opposite the sun. In simple terms, something in the darkness had sent a concentrated burst of energy towards Psyche just as it turned to face 3I Atlas. As the team continued their reconstruction, they found another anomaly buried deep in the data logs. A single line of code that shouldn't have existed. It wasn't written in standard NASA command syntax, nor in any programming language they recognized. When converted to plain text, it translated to coordinates, 3 pairs of numbers that pointed not to a random location, but to the exact sector of space where 3I Atlas had been predicted to pass during the blackout. The implication was chilling. Either someone, or something, had embedded this message into Psyche's system, using the blackout to deliver it. At first, NASA dismissed the coordinates as corrupted telemetry, but within a week, independent astronomers began noticing faint activity in that same region of space. A dense cluster of dust and gas began to glow faintly in infrared images, as if it had been recently disturbed. It wasn't a star-forming region, and it hadn't shown any movement for decades. Now, suddenly, it was alive with energy. Then came the sound. Amateur radio operators monitoring deep space frequencies started reporting bursts of static that repeated in patterns. The bursts matched the exact timing of the lost 3-day blackout window. When they converted the frequencies into audio, the result was a deep, rhythmic hum, low, steady, and almost melodic. Those who listened long enough described a strange sensation, as if their heartbeat began syncing with the rhythm. It was subtle, but undeniable. Back at NASA, Dr. Holt tried to push for a deeper public investigation, but her access was quietly revoked. Her ID was deactivated, and her lab was sealed under data preservation orders. In a private note to a colleague, she wrote, "It wasn't interference, it was communication." That note leaked weeks later through an anonymous email to a scientific forum, but most dismissed it as a hoax. Yet the data she left behind matched readings from other observatories around the world, including the European Space Agency's Gaia mission. Whatever passed through Psyche's field had sent the same signal to multiple receivers. More troubling was the timing of a global server update issued across several government data centers during the blackout. Classified logs later showed that key astrophysical datasets were mirrored and replaced in real time. It looked like a synchronization event, massive, coordinated, and deliberate. The only question was, by who? Meanwhile, in the days that followed, astronomers noticed something eerie. The predicted trajectory of 3I Atlas had changed. Instead of continuing on its outbound path, it appeared to have decelerated slightly and adjusted course. By fractions of a degree, yes, but enough to be measurable. A natural comet can't just change direction like that, not without an external force. Yet no visible propulsion, no outgassing, no impact could explain it. It was as if the object had simply decided to move differently. That was when whispers began circulating among NASA insiders about a secondary contact. The story went that another transmission was received, just hours after Psyche's feed returned, one so brief it was nearly overlooked. It lasted less than 5 seconds and was embedded deep in the background noise of the returning data stream. Analysts initially thought it was a compression error, but when decoded, it produced a faint digital tone, 3 ascending notes followed by a pause, then a single deep echo. The sequence didn't match any system alert or machine signal ever used by NASA. To some, it sounded almost intentional. When scientists plotted the tone's waveform, they discovered that the intervals between the notes matched the spacing of the Orion pulses recorded months earlier. It was the same signature, the same fingerprint, but now closer, more refined. Psyche hadn't just recorded data, it had received something. Outside of the agency, people began connecting dots. Every government blackout, every routine system outage, every delayed space feed, it all began to look like part of a larger cover-up. The phrase, the Psyche silence, became a rallying cry among conspiracy communities. But even within those, some believed there was more truth to it than anyone dared admit. Then came a strange coincidence. A week after the data review was sealed, astronomers noticed that a small dim object near Jupiter's orbit had started reflecting light differently. Spectral analysis showed an artificial signature, smooth, metallic, with a reflective pattern unlike any known asteroid. NASA denied it had any connection to Psyche's trajectory, yet the timing aligned perfectly. Dr. Holt's final message before disappearing from public view was short and haunting. "They didn't turn off the feed," she wrote. "Something else did, and whatever it was, it saw us too." In the days that followed Dr. Holt's disappearance, something strange began circulating through private astronomy networks. A small encrypted file appeared on a dark peer-to-peer data exchange used by professional stargazers and researchers. The file's name was simple: psyche-temp.wav. No one knew where it came from, but it was timestamped just hours before NASA officially announced Psyche's data corruption. Those who downloaded it found that it wasn't a document or image. It was an audio file. At first it sounded like static, but if you listened closely, a faint rhythm emerged underneath, almost like a heartbeat buried in a storm. When digital analysts cleaned up the file, they discovered a sequence of tones, 5 repeating pulses, then a pause, followed by 3 higher frequency clicks. It was the same timing pattern detected in the Orion signal months earlier, except this time the pulses were faster, stronger, and strangely consistent. It was almost as if the signal wasn't coming from deep space anymore. It was closer, directed, and unmistakably intelligent in its pattern. Soon after, a small group of independent researchers tried to cross-check the audio file with Psyche's publicly available telemetry data. That's when they found something chilling. The timestamp in the audio lined up exactly with the moment Psyche's feed went dark. The tone started just as the probe lost visual contact with 3i Atlas. It wasn't a coincidence. It was the missing piece, the signal Psyche had received right before everything went silent. Meanwhile, NASA's public feed remained quiet. Official statements avoided mentioning any sound data at all. They maintained that the blackout was caused by a routine data relay malfunction. But behind closed doors, a very different story was taking shape. According to an internal memo leaked to a science journalist, the agency's Deep Space Signal Lab had picked up the same tones, not once, but twice, after Psyche's systems came back online. The second time, the pattern changed. Instead of 5 pulses, there were 7, and the pauses were shorter, almost like someone, or something, was repeating itself faster, trying to be understood. This lost transmission, as it came to be known, became one of the most controversial moments in NASA's recent history. The tones didn't fit any known astrophysical pattern. They weren't cosmic background noise, nor were they reflections from radio equipment. The source was moving, tracking 3I Atlas's path through the inner solar system, matching its velocity almost perfectly. The conclusion was hard to ignore. Whatever was sending the signal was either attached to 3I Atlas or following it deliberately. A few weeks later, a European observatory in Spain managed to record the same pattern again, but this time with faint visual data attached. For a brief 3-second window, one of their infrared telescopes captured a blurry image of something behind the comet. A glowing arc, thin and symmetrical, extending outward like a wing or sail. The color was unusual, deep violet fading into silver. It didn't match any natural reflection or known debris. Whatever it was, it looked deliberate. When researchers compared this new data to Psyche's last known signal burst, the results lined up perfectly. The object seen in Spain was in the exact same relative position Psyche had recorded before going silent. This suggested that Psyche's blackout might not have been an accident. It was the result of direct exposure to that same object. Some even speculated that the object had interacted with the probe, possibly scanning or transmitting through it. Soon after, an amateur radio astronomer from Arizona uploaded a decoded spectrogram of the signal. Hidden deep within the frequencies was a repeating pattern that looked eerily familiar. 3 vertical bars, followed by a triangular formation of dots. Astrophysicists noticed the same geometry appeared in several ancient astronomical carvings, the Orion trident pattern. Coincidence or not, the alignment was too perfect to ignore. Then came the most unnerving discovery. Someone ran the Psyche temp.wav audio through a spectrograph capable of converting sound into visual frequencies. What appeared on the screen was not random noise. It was a shape, an elongated curve that mirrored the orbital path of 3I Atlas through the solar system. Embedded inside that curve were small frequency spikes corresponding to the orbits of Earth, Mars, and Jupiter. The signal itself was mapping the system. It was as if the message was showing us where it was and where it was going next. NASA's silence grew louder with each new finding. Journalists began pressing for transparency, but officials gave only vague answers about incomplete data sets and pending analysis. Behind the scenes, however, several whistleblowers hinted that Psyche's systems hadn't just received audio, they'd also transmitted something back. It wasn't standard procedure for a probe under data blackout, yet telemetry logs hinted at a brief outbound signal, barely a second long, sent automatically after the tones were received. Whatever Psyche recorded, it might have triggered a response. By now, the world's space agencies were all paying attention. Japan's JAXA reported unusual interference near their asteroid observation network. The European Space Agency quietly redirected its satellite dish arrays toward the same sector of the sky. China went completely silent on its deep space network. And then, 3 days later, the tone stopped. No new signals, no static, no interference, just complete silence, as if whatever had been communicating simply shut off or went dark again. That's when a different kind of data appeared. A classified report leaked through an anonymous post showed high-energy readings detected over the southern Pacific Ocean during the exact moment the tones ended. The readings matched the frequency of Psyche's last outgoing signal burst. It wasn't strong enough to be visible from the ground, but instruments aboard the ISS detected it. The direction? Directly aligned with the trajectory of 3I Atlas. Something in space had echoed back, briefly, and then vanished. Within days, rumors spread that the lost transmission wasn't lost at all. It was being studied, and that deep inside one of NASA's secure data vaults, engineers were working on decoding what some now called the Psyche reply. Unofficially, it was said that the tones contained more than just sound. They held binary data. And when those bits were arranged in a pattern, they formed something that no one expected. A visual, a faint outline, almost human in shape, standing inside a spiral of light. As more leaks emerged, NASA cut off access to its public data servers, citing cybersecurity concerns. The official explanation claimed they were preventing disinformation. But inside the space community, one thing became clear: the blackout, the tones, the strange light behind 3i Atlas. They were all connected. Something out there had noticed us noticing it. The story begins to take its final turn as the whispers surrounding the Psyche reply grow louder. For weeks, the space community and the public alike have been left in uncertainty, caught between disbelief and quiet awe. NASA's silence has only deepened the mystery, giving rise to speculation that the message hidden within the lost transmission wasn't just sound, but something encoded, deliberate, and personal. Some researchers claim the data was reconstructed in a visual format, and what appeared wasn't a random scatter of pixels or a meaningless diagram. It was a pattern that mirrored both the path of 3i Atlas and the structure of our own solar system. Except, this map seemed to be drawn from an outside perspective, as if observed from far beyond the Milky Way's edge. Within the image, there was one strange symbol positioned directly over the space where Earth should be. It wasn't a circle or a point of light. It was a spiral, slowly expanding outward, fading at the edges, like a signal still echoing into space. A few analysts noticed that the spiral resembled the exact waveform of the heartbeat signal captured in the original Psyche audio. It was as though the sender had marked Earth as the source, not the destination. That detail changed everything. It suggested that whatever was out there had been responding, not initiating contact. The tones, the pulses, the visual, all of. It may have been a reflection of something we ourselves had unknowingly sent first. Meanwhile, rumors began to circulate that NASA's internal investigation had moved into the hands of a classified defense project. Contractors were pulled in quietly, and several scientists who had previously spoken to the media went silent overnight. One of them, a telemetry engineer from the Psyche team, left a single cryptic note in an encrypted chat room. It wasn't a comet. It was waiting for us. Those words spread quickly across every space forum and investigative community online. The idea that 3i Atlas was not just a wandering object, but a kind of messenger, something aware, took hold. At the same time, several deep space listening stations began reporting faint radio interference that matched the same harmonic range as the Psyche tones. It wasn't strong enough to decode, but it pulsed every few hours, consistent, rhythmic, like a fading heartbeat. Observatories in Chile, Spain, and Hawaii each confirmed brief readings, but none of them lasted long enough for analysis. The Maya signals seemed to appear only when 3i Atlas aligned with certain planetary positions, as if triggered by resonance or timing. It was almost ritualistic in nature, a cosmic clock ticking towards something larger. A few scientists tried to approach it rationally. They argued that the signals could be natural byproducts of solar interaction, energy bursts reflecting off dust trails or magnetized plasma around the comet's core. But then came the image from the James Webb Space Telescope, released quietly, almost unnoticed at first. It showed a faint structured lattice behind 3i Atlas, geometric, symmetrical, too organized to be a dust pattern. Some speculated it was an interference artifact, others weren't so sure. When overlaid with the decoded Psyche visual, the structures matched almost perfectly, like two halves of the same design. By now, public trust in official channels had eroded. People wanted answers, and NASA's consistent silence only fueled suspicion. Space enthusiasts started comparing mission timelines and discovered something uncanny. The blackout window from Psyche coincided almost exactly with multiple minor communication disruptions on Earth. Satellite pings, radio blackouts, even brief anomalies in GPS synchronization. None of these lasted more than a few minutes, but together they painted a strange picture. Whatever interfered with Psyche might not have stayed confined to space. Around this time, several amateur astronomers began reporting a new light in the night sky, faint but steady, trailing just behind 3I Atlas. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, but under long exposure photography, a soft blue halo could be seen shimmering in the void. It wasn't there before the blackout. No known observatory could explain it, yet those who tracked it noticed it, followed a path identical to the predicted orbit of the interstellar object, only slightly delayed, as if shadowing it. Some began calling it the Echo. Theories spread like wildfire. Some said it was a fragment broken off during Psyche's encounter. Others believed it was a secondary craft, perhaps launched or activated by the main object. A smaller group, however, proposed something even stranger: that 3I Atlas was not a single body at all, but part of a network, a system of connected entities traveling through interstellar space in coordination. If that were true, then Psyche's blackout might have been the moment the probe was recognized, tagged, or even integrated into something much larger than any of us could comprehend. When NASA finally spoke again, their message was carefully measured. A spokesperson confirmed that all systems aboard Psyche had been restored and that anomalous data transmission events were under review. They refused to answer questions about the lost days or the leaked signal file, calling them unauthorized interpretations of unverified data. But their tone was different, cautious, deliberate, almost afraid. They emphasized that 3I Atlas was continuing on a stable trajectory and posed no threat to Earth. Yet for many watching, it didn't sound like reassurance. It sounded like a script. As the world waited, another unexpected event occurred. A small, uncrewed research satellite operated by a European university detected a burst of radiation from deep space that lasted precisely 8 seconds, the same length as the Psyche transmission. The coordinates traced directly to the current position of 3I Atlas. But unlike previous bursts, this one carried an embedded modulation pattern, a series of rising and falling tones resembling human speech in cadence, but not in structure. It was as if someone, or something, was repeating a phrase too complex for us to understand. In the following days, a few scientists publicly suggested that the signal might be a natural echo caused by electromagnetic scattering, but others quietly admitted that the synchronization and pattern density were too structured to dismiss. Even AI models trained on human phonetic data recognized rhythmic intervals that resembled syllabic pacing. Whatever was transmitting was doing so with purpose, not chance. Late one night, an astronomer at the Green Bank Observatory uploaded a final spectrogram comparison. He overlaid the latest signal with the original Psyche audio, and when the two were combined, the result was haunting. A complete waveform, symmetrical, harmonic, almost melodic. The missing half had been found. It was never random noise. It was a call and a response, and just like that, the meaning began to crystallize. Psyche hadn't just received a message, it had completed one. The blackout wasn't a malfunction, it was a bridge. For the first time in human history, we might have been part of a two-way exchange across the stars. Not an accident, not an anomaly, but an interaction. The realization sent quiet shivers through the scientific world. If the data was correct, then something out there had acknowledged our existence and answered. Tonight, as we look up at the faint streak of light crossing the outer reaches of our solar system, one question remains. Was this our first true contact, or a warning? Perhaps we are witnessing not the arrival of something new, but the awakening of something that has always been watching. If you've been following this journey with me, now's the time to stay connected. Tap that like button, share this with someone who loves uncovering space mysteries, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because this story isn't over yet, and the next discovery could change how we see the universe forever.